and welcome to another episode of Generation Gap. I'm your host, Taylor J, and this week's topic discussion is sexual harassment. At this time, I would like to ask my panel to introduce themselves, starting from my left to right.
Hi, I'm Macy. I'm a pre-vet major, and I'm from Jersey.
And I'm Sylvia Lentz. I live in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and I took special education when I was in school.
My name is Savannah, and I am an English Econ dual back, and I am from Lancaster.
Thank you. Now, before we begin our discussion, I would like to send it off to Allison with our field report.
Hey guys, Allison here. We are at Stapleton Library talking to students about sexual harassment. Let's see what they have to say. Hi guys, Allison here. We are here talking to Chris about sexual harassment. So Chris, what would you consider sexual harassment to be?
I would consider it to be any unwanted or unneeded affection, whether it's physical or verbally.
Okay, and then do you think that sexual harassment differentiates between men and women?
I think culture perceives it differently, but I don't think there's a difference.
And then do you think that sexual harassment has changed in our society over time? Do you think that people are more aware of it now as we're getting into a more verbal generation, I guess?
Yes, I definitely think so, and more people are aware of it also because I think of social media and the news picking up more on it, so kids are being taught it at a young age rather than, I know my parents, they weren't really taught it much in school. They knew what it was, but they weren't mostly aware of it like we are today in society.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Back to you, Taylor.
Thanks, Allison. At this time, I'm just going to jump right in and ask my first question. How would you say that sexual harassment is handled, and is it dependent on the circumstances and even the environment?
Personally, I don't think it's handled very well at all. It's dependent on both the circumstance and the environment, and I just think that it could definitely be handled better than it is.
I think sexual harassment many times is swept under the rug, and I mean, obviously there are some formal channels that you could follow, but
I completely agree that it's swept under the rug, but I think it's swept under in two different fashions. On the one hand, if it's reported, no one really knows what to do with the information besides a small slap on the wrist for whoever it is. But on the other hand, I think women especially are nervous to report it and are nervous, does this even count as sexual harassment? Should I just quiet down and take this one, especially if there's, authority circumstances or if there's circumstances with someone underage. Those are very delicate circumstances. So on the other hand, sexual harassment sometimes isn't handled well by the victim, not going about the right routes of reporting it and making sure it gets better.
Yeah, I feel like girls just they're taught to expect it. Like, oh yeah, that means that they like you and they're flirting with you.
Of course,
and
that's
it's
what
cute.
we're all told in first grade. If a boy's teasing you, it means he likes you. What a terrible way to go about
and then you want it to happen.
Exactly. We're taught that that's something to be flattered by. How terrible is that? Especially the statistics in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, are abysmal because they tend to be male-dominated fields, and women, especially rather attractive women, deal with terrible bullying and harassment at the same time. We have to serve our women better and tell them that sexual harassment is not acceptable, and you are within your rights as a human person to report that.
Yeah, and it just it's so downplayed, and it's bad. It's not good. It's an understatement.
Oh, God. Absolutely.
That leads me to my next question of how should sexual harassment claims be handled at a college?
It should be handled seriously. Like we said, it's not, especially in a college because of the setting that we're in. It's like, oh, it's gonna happen. You're in a setting and you don't have all that much, boundaries, it's gonna happen. Just put it, don't handle it.
I think part of the problem with how we're handling it is that we're trying to do like a cleanup afterwards instead of preventative measures.
Exactly.
I think we're doing a better job at doing more Title IX training and more training. I know a lot of the Greek life people and various clubs are trying to promote awareness for not only report sexual harassment, but all of these things qualify as sexual harassment. So while on the hand of punishment, there leaves a lot to be desired. I think what leaves more to be desired is better education so that people know what it is, what counts, and some of the punishments available if you violate any of the guidelines.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think prevention is very important, but I mean, after it's already happened. I mean, if you go, to a superior, somebody stronger, and I think too, it depends if the victim is feeling intimidated or if they're feeling afraid, then someone who's stronger and able to handle the situation, needs to either teach that person how to combat it themselves, which obviously would be ideal, or else step in and deal with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's part of a problem with the way we educate our women, that we should just take it, sort of like you were talking about, like, oh, it's not that big a deal, don't want to make waves, that kind of a thing. So I think that women taking care of other women in that sense is absolutely vital.
And I also feel like women are like interrogated when it happens. Like, we're expected to give every single detail, like it didn't happen, and it's like you have to prove that it happened.
Are you certain you were harassed? Like if you ask them more times, they're gonna say, actually, LOL, just kidding, I made up the whole thing.
It's like, I mean, I feel like I was harassed. Isn't that enough? That should count for something.
But here we are.
Right. Well, I think if you're afraid or you're intimidated, or that's when you need to make a change somehow.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah.
At this time, I would like to thank you guys very much, but we have to go to a quick break. Please don't kill me. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
True or false? Only women get sexually harassed. Find out when we come back.
Students in communications media at Indiana University of Pennsylvania can focus on a variety of areas, including media promotions. Our promotion students learn their skills by working in a hands-on environment, gaining real-world experience. They learn how to use media to promote, produce, and manage events, and how media organizations operate. They create promotional campaigns and help clients pitch their services, products, and events. With excellent classes led by experienced teachers, the Communications Media Department at IUP is perfect for students interested in media promotions.
Answer. False. Although it's more common among women, men have also been subjects of sexual harassment. Now back to you, Taylor.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, before we get back into the conversation, let's see what else Allison has for us.
Hi guys, Allison here again. We're talking to Daryl about sexual harassment. So Daryl, what would you consider sexual harassment to be?
Forcing like somebody to do something against their will, basically, like touching a girl's butt, I would say, and she doesn't like it. But some girls like it and some don't. It's like different, but it really depends on respect, how you respect women, pretty much, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you think that sexual harassment differentiates between men and women? Do you think that they see it differently?
Yes, because men think it's okay to touch a girl and da-da-da, and then some women like it, like I said before, but at the same time it's all about respect, because it depends on the girl and what her self-respect, how she represents herself, pretty much, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that sexual harassment has changed over time? From when our parents say we're our age to now?
Yes, because back then they didn't really care about women's rights, and pretty much it was they didn't care. But now it's actually they look at it, and over time it's actually stats and facts about how girls got harassed back then, and now it's it's way more viewable, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your time. Back to you, Taylor.
Thanks, Allison. We're going to dive right back in with the first question. How would you say the perspective of society has changed in the last 20 years in relation to sexual harassment and how much it is accepted?
Well, I worked 20 years ago, and I worked for 3 years, and then as a special education teacher at the high school level, and I found that my experiences were that male students tried to intimidate, and mostly the male colleagues, people my age, weren't doing sexual harassment. They were just trying to get their jobs done and get where they were going. But it did happen from time to time that there was more sex talked about than I was comfortable with. I just confronted it. I'd say, hey, I don't want to talk about that. And they, oh, okay. And that was the end of it. In terms of peers, and that's adults. In terms of students, as a subordinate kind of relationship, their purpose is to intimidate. And you have to be strong enough to say, hey, I actually am feeling intimidated right now, but we're not going to do that. You just confront it. If you confront it, it stops. When I went back to work about 5 years ago to do some substitute teaching, walked into the classroom, same routine. Male colleagues are perfectly fine to deal with. They see you as a team member, not any trouble at all. But if it's a subordinate kind of a relationship, then I want to intimidate. I want to stand too close to you. I want to drop my pencil too close to you, so you have to pick it up and feel uncomfortable. And then I'll get out of doing work for at least 3 minutes while we go through that, and maybe I'll have intimidated you into getting me out of some other work later. I mean, why? That kind of thing needs to be confronted. And if you're strong enough to turn around and do that and say, hey, well, we can just write you up, or however it is you're going to deal with it.
Exactly. And I think that strength is so important, and we've empowered our girls much better recently. I mean, I'm only 20, so I can't speak to quite how it was when you were teaching 20 years ago. But from what I've experienced since, we're sort of the internet generation, there's been a lot going on online to help empower girls. You're not the only one who's being sexually harassed. This is not an isolated case. There are other women going through it with you. And you, as a human person taking up space, have the right to not work in an environment in which you feel sexually harassed. So I think that through the internet, we've been able to empower each other as women, that we're not alone, and that we have a right to the workplace just as much as men do, and a harassment-free, judgment-free workplace just like the men do.
Exactly. It's more, what's the word, acceptable to be like, I don't feel comfortable. I don't like this. Exactly. Yeah. I don't want to deal with this, and I don't want this to happen anymore.
Absolutely. And go ahead.
20 years ago, I remember saying, I don't remember exactly what I said because it was 20 years ago, but I remember the men I was saying, something to the effect of, I don't want to talk about sex today. And they said, hey, you got to be kidding me. And then he said to the guy next to him, you've got to be kidding me. And the other guy said, I don't think she's kidding. And that was the end of it. But that was the end of it.
Yeah, well,
and it never happened again.
But then, you have to think that some people probably wouldn't have the confidence to be like, oh, I don't want to talk about it.
How do you say? How do you
exactly,
say, I don't want to
be involved
I don't want to talk about sex? Isn't that obvious? Don't we all not want to talk about it? Don't you remember 8th grade? Nobody wanted to talk about it in 8th grade. Why do we want to talk about it now? Do we remember that?
I'm sorry to interrupt, ladies.
Seems like
this conversation is going really good. At this time, we do have to take a quick break, and we will continue when we come back.
Hello, I'm Maurice Daniels, and welcome to Ruffles My Feathers. You know what ruffles my feathers? Banks. A friend of mine has to take out a private loan in order to pay for their internship to count for class credit. And since his 8 semesters of financial aid are up, one of his only options is to get a loan from the bank. But the problem is, a lot of banks have ridiculous interest rates. They should already know that most of us college students are broke anyway. Quite frankly, taking out Taking out loans is already difficult, so the least they could do is have reasonable interest rates. I'm Maurice, and that is what ruffles my feathers.
Hey guys, so if you're just tuning in, we've been having a great conversation about, sexual harassment, and we've been getting a lot of different great ideas and great opinions. At this time, we're going to shoot to Allison one more time with the field report.
Hi guys, we're here talking to Mitchell about sexual harassment. So Mitchell, what would you consider sexual harassment to be?
I think sexual harassment would be, I would consider it to be anything that pressures someone or makes someone feel uncomfortable. Anything like, it can be even more than physical. I think anything like even in conversation, I just think anything generally that makes someone like physically uncomfortable is kind of what I think sexual harassment like falls under.
And do you think that that's differentiates between men and women? Do you think that they see sexual harassment differently?
I think maybe women might see sexual harassment a little bit differently, but I think that just because they're women wouldn't hinder them from being someone who would take place like in sexual like harassment.
Exactly.
So I think like man or woman, it's the same, but I definitely think that they could have different thoughts and like how strong their opinions are.
Oh, definitely. All right, last question. So do you think that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. How do you, we'll just edit this part out. All right, how do you think that sexual harassment has changed over the years, like since our parents were our age to now?
Probably to now. I think maybe it might have gotten a little worse. I think people in this day and age are a lot more forward. Sexual harassment can happen like over social media through like communicating not face to face. So I think that in some cases it's gotten a lot worse, but also in some cases now I feel like more people are less afraid to bring the situation to light if need be.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Back to you, Taylor.
Thanks again, Allison. Let's jump right back into the last question. What role does gender play in relation to sexual harassment? And would you say that the urgency of the claim is dependent on gender?
That's a whole can of worms, and I'm really sad that we're having this conversation without a man here, because I feel like that would have been really helpful right now. But I think that there is a difference in urgency when it comes to gender, and I think it's part of a protective instinct. Women protect women, and men often feel like if there's a woman being hurt, they have to jump to her aid. But we live in such a culture of hyper-masculinity and strength and everything that I feel like men are going to be more ashamed to report such a thing. I think that they're going to be more nervous to have to tattle on a woman for making or pointing out something or sexually harassing them, and I think there's a little bit of embarrassment that they feel so harassed that by a woman, right, that they'd have to go and tattle on her. So I think that of course there's some gender problems there where men don't take sexual harassment. Like they're less comfortable reporting it because it's not very manly.
The way that I see it is that women have an issue reporting because them reporting a guy might be like, oh, well, he's just flirting with you, you could deal with it, like we already kind of talked about. And then if a man reports it, it's like, oh, well, I mean, why does it matter? You've got a chick hitting on you. Like, why are you reporting it?
Exactly. It's like
that's great.
Has it ever happened? Are there documented cases where men have reported sexual harassment? I mean,
I don't know.
I haven't remember any news stories related to anything like that. But is it always women or is it?
I can't imagine that it's always women.
Yeah, I would think that.
Here's what I would imagine, if I may just offer a guess. It does happen to men. I'm not sure that men ever report it, because if they were to report it to a man or even a woman, they'd say it's a compliment. What threat does she pose to you? Get back to work. I know that there's been more and more stories of sexual assault against men and rape against men. That has gotten more reported. Yeah. But I think harassment, because it is everything up to like physical touch and what constitutes assault? Is that penetration, I think? I think it's more along those lines. So I think anything up to that, you're supposed to just sort of man up and take it. So I don't know that it's been reported, as you said.
All I would think rather than gender, it would be the key factor. It would be more, who's the weaker person here? Who has more power? I mean, if this perpetrator has power and the victim doesn't, then there's a situation of intimidation and fear going on there, then that, I think, increases the urgency to the heightened level.
And I think that's important to talk about. That sexual harassment isn't always about sex. It's about fear, it's about control, and it's about authority, you know. And so I think that that's often a misconception, that you want to go into a conversation about this and be like, well, was he trying to have sex with you? That's not the question at hand. It's, did you feel violated? Did you feel uncomfortable and in a hostile work environment, you know? It's not a question of sex. Exactly. It's a question of, you know, safety.
Would you say it is the responsibility of men to resuscitate the idea of respecting women, their professions, and even their bodies?
I think that we have to equally distribute the responsibility. We need men to stop harassing people on the one hand, but I think that we have to empower women to say, you are not allowed to harass me. I do not give you permission to do that. I was reading an article because I think that the common definition of consent right now is sober, verbal, enthusiastic consent, right? And someone was saying, I understand the enthusiastic part, but I think instead of asking people to be enthusiastic, we should ask them to be more capricious with your yes and no. If you don't want something to happen, be very explicit. I do not want you to say that anymore. I will report you if you say this again. So I think while we need men to stop harassing people, of course, and just general harassers, I guess that's unfair to say. We need harassers to stop harassing people, and we need the harassed to feel more empowered to put a stop to it.
I feel like it does need to go both ways, but I also feel like, you know, it kind of goes along with, you know, rape culture. I feel like, you know, like you look at dress codes in schools, like, you know, the two-finger, the two-finger shirt sleeve. Sorry, guys. You know, why do girls need to make sure that their sleeves are a certain length? Why can't boys just be taught to control themselves? Like, why is it our fault? We're not, you know, oh my goodness, we're wearing a strap.
Oh my God, shoulders.
Exactly, shoulders. Like, that's not, my shoulders are distracting you, I'm sorry. Like, shouldn't people be taught to have more self-control?
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Here's a second trivia question before we go to break. What decade did federal courts recognize sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination? Is it A, the 1970s, B, 1930s, C, the 1880s, or D, the 1950s? Find out when we come back.
The Career Development Center, they've helped me with my internship, being able to market myself, just being able to package myself the right way in order to land a job that will be secure. I had the ability to sharpen my resume skills, and my resume is beautiful, and I think anyone in the communications department will definitely agree that their resume is probably top of the line.
Welcome back. Now, before we went to break, I asked, what decade did federal courts recognize sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination? Was it A, 1970s, B, the 1930s, C, 1880s, or D, the 1950s? The answer was A, 1970s. Now enjoy the rest of the show.
Welcome back, everyone. At this time, we're going to conclude today's episode with one final question, which is, what advice would you give to a victim of sexual harassment?
I would just say be strong. Stand by yourself. Stand with yourself and how you feel, and you know, don't stand down, back down just because somebody might be telling you that, oh, your feelings aren't important. That's, you know, it's not a big deal.
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, you have to reassure that their feelings are perfectly valid. What you're feeling in terms of like how hostile your environment is, if you feel violated, even if all the sexual harassment you experienced was verbal or side glances, the way you feel is valid. And I think you'd also have to reassure a survivor or a victim that they're not the only person to have gone through such a thing, and that this has been a pervasive systemic problem in our workplaces, especially in the STEM fields, for years. They're not the only one. And I think that it's also urgent to know that they're not alone in terms of people they can come and talk to. They need to find friends, find counselors, find people they trust, find other victims who have been through it and gotten through it and learned how to get past it and make their environment less hostile.
I think I would say if you're afraid, you're intimidated, confront it immediately. Don't wait. Well, if it happens again, then I'll deal with it. Well, if it happens again, I'll deal with it. You know, I'm not comfortable talking about that. Be done with it, and you know, let the person know first time out. You don't want to hear, but you don't want to be treated that way.
Absolutely, I think that's so important.
Confront it, and it's awkward because how do you form a sentence that says, "I don't like what you just said"? You know, that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to confront, to tell somebody you don't like what they said or you don't like the way what they just did or whatever. It's uncomfortable, but in the long run, it solves the problem. It makes everybody more comfortable. But
absolutely, and I think that's why it's so important for women to be strong for other women, because not all of us are very, you know, in-your-face confrontational. Clearly I am. I'm a very loud human being, but other people aren't, especially if there's an authority dynamic at play or if there's like an age issue at play. That makes it even more awkward. So I feel like we as women need to be open to hearing experiences of sexual harassment and not immediately interrogate, like you were talking about, like, are you certain?
Exactly.
You know, it's not helpful, it's not constructive, and it doesn't accomplish the mission of empowering your friends, especially your women friends. So I think that we have to be open and we have to be responsive, and sometimes we have to be strong for each other in that sense, you know?
Exactly.
I knew a young person that she was 13 and she was doing some babysitting, and you know, she was in the neighborhood, and she said to me, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Oh, sure, go ahead." And she said, "Well, the little boy I was babysitting, who's 8 years old, asked me, can he kiss me?" And I didn't know what to say. I said, "Really? He's 8? And you couldn't say to an 8-year-old, no, you can't kiss me, but you know, you can kiss your mom and you can kiss your dad, and when you grow up, you can, you know, kiss your wife." You didn't have the backbone or the confidence to say no. I mean, there are women that just don't have that.
They don't have it.
And she was 13 at the time, so I did say, you know, and hopefully she learned to say no.
Yeah.
You know, but
you have to empower her to do that.
8. You couldn't figure that out. No, an 8-year-old doesn't need to be kissing you, and you can say no.
And that's scary on both sides. A, that you have a 13-year-old who can't stand up to an 8-year-old, and B, that you have an 18-year-old with enough gumption to ask that question. Like, there's just so many, you know, pervasive problems in terms of why we have such an issue with sexual harassment right now.
At this time, I would like to give my panel a few minutes to express any last-minute thoughts before we wrap things up.
I got one. Women got to ride for other women.
Yeah.
We have to do it. If you see something,
it's just like an overall.
Absolutely. Even if you witness sexual harassment, if someone comes to you, even with just an awkward hypothetical question because they're unsure, you have to be there for your women. We got to ride for
Not just women. We keep saying that.
Absolutely.
Not just women.
I understand. But women do have to ride for women.
At this time, I would like to thank my lovely panel for you guys' great opinions today and very vibrant live personalities. That's all from us. Thanks for watching Generation Gap. I'm your host, Taylor J, and I'll see you next time.